Kia ora guys, welcome to StudyTime's Level 2 Written Text Strategy video. I'm Mackenzie.
I'm Jordan.
And in this video we're going to be giving you all the tips you need to help you get through this standard. So in the written text standard, basically what you have to do is get a written text, take evidence from it in the form of aspects, and then use this to analyse an idea.
Yeah, and so aspects of the text include things like author's purpose, intended audience, settings, characters, themes, language features like metaphors and symbolism, and narrative structure.
When we analyse, what we're doing is taking these aspects and then interpreting them to answer our question.
Yeah, and to get excellence, you need to do all that perceptively. And that pretty much just means being deep about it. But in the words of NCEA, having an insightful and original analysis. And that's all well and good on paper, but how do you actually do that in an essay? Well, let's get involved.
One of the most important things to bear in mind when you're writing your essay is that you're trying to be persuasive, not informative. You don't want to be giving a retelling of A Clockwork Orange to your marker. They're all English teachers, they've read it 4 times, they know what happens. What you want to be doing is trying to give an argument. And when we use aspects of the text as evidence, what we're doing is we're proving our thesis, where our thesis is the argument that we're trying to make. So for example, in The Great Gatsby, religion is used by Fitzgerald as a warning to 1920s Americans that the American dream can come at the cost of morality.
So there's a common misconception if you get E in the mocks, you should hold on to the essay for dear life and then memorize it and regurgitate it from your mind palace and the real thing and you'll get E again, right? No, that's a bad idea. And in the assessment report that Mackenzie was talking about, the markers said that they could tell a lot of essays were pre-prepared. And what that means is that the thesis didn't actually answer the question, so they couldn't actually get E because their understanding wasn't relevant. Remember that in order to get excellence, we need to make sure that we have a perceptive understanding, which is one that's insightful and original. Insight means looking below the surface level of the text and pointing at deeper, underlying perceptive ideas that the author was really getting at. A perceptive idea is one that relates to society, the human condition, or wider literature. Society is the world that we live in, the world that the author wants us to live in, or the world that the author was living in at the time that he was writing it, or she. A human condition is the flaws, experiences, feelings that make us human that we all go through. And wider literature is how this book fits into other texts. Now we can't just say, oh, Puss in Boots represents hope. We have to say how and why it does this. So how does aspects of the text prove your thesis that something represents something else? And why was the author getting at that?
It's important when we're discussing society in our essay that we're not just producing something regurgitated from teachers' notes or something that isn't relevant to the question. To stay on track with this, it's important to bear in mind the author's purpose in their writing. Why did they choose to weave in the ideas that they did into the text that you've chosen to analyse? What can also be really helpful for this is considering the author's environment and the things that were going on in their lives that influenced their writing. So if we take someone like George Orwell, for example, his writings were heavily inspired by the fact that he very much despised a totalitarian government and also from the wars that he experienced as a police officer and also in the army.
So the other part of perception is originality. And to do that in terms of language, we need to use a personal voice, which means, different sentence lengths, interesting, paragraph points, that kind of good stuff, different vocabulary. But it also means having original ideas. If you've got some interpretation of like how things in The Great Gatsby link together or like how The Great Gatsby could be applied to the modern world, put that in. If it's different from Becky sitting next to you, that is a plus.
The best way to start your introduction off on the right track is using the upside down pyramid structure, where we begin with a philosophical yarn. And this could be about any of the big 3, whether that be the human condition, society, or wider literature. And what you're showing here to the marker is that what you're discussing is important. Secondly, you give your thesis statement, which might be 1 or 2 sentences. And if you're struggling to start this, think of beginning with, I'm going to prove that, yada yada yada. Thirdly, you want to be giving your evidence, and this is essentially going to be your 3 paragraphs, ideas. And so if we're going to use The Great Gatsby again, it might be how the historical context, themes, and symbolism all contribute to the argument you're trying to make.
So your 3 main points are your 3 paragraphs, and each paragraph needs to have a purpose, which should always be to help prove your thesis. This is how your paragraphs become linked together rather than just random yarns to show that you've read a book. A good but not compulsory paragraph structure is Texas, where T is the topic sentence or the purpose of that paragraph. The E is the evidence, so a quote about your aspect of the text. Then you explain how this comes together to prove your topic sentence. The A is the author's purpose and what they were trying to convey, and that's where you bring in, it's society, human condition, whatever. And summary, you like title and article together and drop the mic. A good rule of thumb is around about 3 paragraphs per essay with 1 to 2 pieces of evidence per paragraph.
So to sum up, guys, you want to have a strong thesis throughout your whole essay, and you want to refer back to it often, using your evidence to show how or why.
Yeah, and so the aspects of the text are just used as evidence to help prove your interpretation of the text, which should be perceptive, which means it has to be insightful and original. And to do that, you need to show how society, the human condition, or wider literature is all involved in what the author was trying to convey through writing that text. And that's how you also show appreciation.
And so if you want to prepare for this kind of exam, we recommend that you go through and practice some old essays and look at the kind of questions that NCEA has given in the past so you know what to prepare for.
Yeah, if you go onto our website, you'll see the level 1 walkthrough guide, which is amazing because I wrote it. And although it is level 1, it does have a lot of useful advice you can still apply level 2. Some of the stuff remains the same about writing essays. But there's also a whole bunch of really helpful articles, like how to plan an essay, how to analyze film, that kind of good stuff you should check out. So yeah, is that it?
That's it.
Cool.
Thanks, guys.
I'll use that tag, I like it.
Okay.
All right. Thanks.
For one reason that I don't